In January 2025, Netflix premiered a mini-series called American Primeval. This series tells a fictional story based on a historical event that actually did take place, although there are some differences. This event is called the Mountain Meadows Massacre. In the first episode, the series depicts a Mormon militia attacking a group of travelers heading from Arkansas to California. For many, this is the first time they've heard about this tragic event, which has generated varying reactions. For this episode, we travel to the site where the massacre occurred, and we will read together the commemorative plaques that describe the event. The information really doesn't get any more official than this, it comes straight from the park. This massacre took place in southern Utah, just about 40 miles northwest of St. George. It's a peaceful, beautiful, and moving monument in the middle of a valley. The valley itself remains unspoiled, except for a few trails created for visitors to this monument. The monument also allows visitors to the grave created by the US Army a few years after the massacre took place, as well as the commemorative plaques where you can read about what happened. The site has several stops connected by a road that allows you to travel across stops. At one of the stops, we learned the following. In early September 1857, about 140 camped in this valley. Most of them were families from northwest Arkansas, led by Captain John T. Baker and Alexander Fancher. They were headed to new opportunities in California. Their worldly possessions included about 35 wagons, several hundred cattle, and many mules, horses, and oxen. Beginning on September 7th, the camp was attacked by a group of Mormon militiamen and the Paiute Indians they had recruited. In a 5-day siege, fueled by complex hostilities, the attackers killed at least 10 men who fought valiantly to defend family and friends. The emigrants fought off their attackers until September 11, when Mormon militiamen entered the encampment under a white flag of truce. The militiamen deceived their victims into surrendering weapons and property in exchange for protection and safety. The militiamen separated the emigrants into 3 groups and marched them from the camp. The wounded and some small children rode in wagons, followed by women and older girls on foot with other children. Men and older boys walked some distances behind, each escorted by a Mormon militiaman. At a prearranged signal, militiamen shot the men, older boys, and some of the wounded. Mormons and Paiutes searched from their hiding places and in a matter of minutes massacred most of the remaining emigrants, including the courageous women who were attempting to protect the children and flee. The victims' voices fell silent except for the sobbing of 17 small surviving children. The dead were stripped of their clothing and left without decent burial. Their wagons, livestock, and other property were plundered in 1859. Soldiers in the United States Army buried the victims' scavenged remains. 17 years after the massacre, a federal grand jury indicted 9 Mormon militiamen for crimes related to the siege and massacre. About 50 other militiamen were involved, along with an unknown number of Paiutes. Only one, John D. Lee, was brought to trial and convicted. He was executed near here on March 23, 1877. John D. Lee, although not named, appears to be portrayed by Woolsey in the series, but that's just my opinion. At the end of this video, I'll share his last words and details of his final testimony, as well as the last photo of him alive on the day of his execution. The commemorative plaque below shows a description of what happened, and we continue reading. Members of the Arkansas wagon train set up camp at this site on Saturday, September 5, 1857. On Sunday, they likely rested and gathered for a Christian worship service, a pattern they had followed through their journey. The next morning, they were attacked without warning. They pulled their wagons into a circle slightly larger than the fence area where you are now. They chained the wagon wheels together and dug below each wheel to lower the wagon beds to the ground. This provided a shield against gunfire. They also dug a long defensive trench that served as a rifle pit. About 140 men, women, and children tried to take cover in the wagon circle, with many huddling together in the trench. At least 7 immigrants were killed here in the first attack. The immigrants repulsed the attackers, killing 1 and wounding 2. 3 or more other immigrants died here during the 5-day siege that followed. Each time fire resumed on the camp, the women and children could be heard screaming with fear, and with each attack, the immigrants put up a brave and determined defense. Not all the defenders were men. Survivor Malon Tackett told of his aunt Eloa Angeline Tackett Jones valiantly joining the fight, grabbing a gun that had belonged to one of the fallen men. Throughout the siege, the immigrants were cut off from their water supply. Courageous men ran from the wagon circle to get water at the nearby spring. Despite heavy gunfire, some managed to fill their buckets and return to the circle. 2 men once left to gather firewood, finished their task under gunfire and returned unharmed. Others bravely left the wagon circle. Stories about these men differ. Some accounts say that 3 or 4 young men left the safety of their camp and went northeast. They were most likely going to Cedar City to seek help. Only one of those young men made it back to the campsite alive. Another account tells of 3 other men, one of them, with the last name Baker, escaping during the siege. They headed southwest, carrying a document that described the immigrants and what they had endured. All 3 were tracked down and murdered in the desert. The document they carried has disappeared. On the 5th day of the siege, attackers came to the camp. Under a white flag, they deceived the immigrants with a false promise of safe passage to Cedar City. The immigrants were almost out of ammunition. They needed water. The wounded required attention. Realizing they could not endure much more, they surrendered. Grieving, they grabbed their dead in buffalo robes, buried them reverently, and walked away from the campsite. The men were last to leave, relying on their captors' promise to protect them and their families. If you want to learn more about this event, I recommend reading the following books. The first one is The Mountain Meadows Massacre by Juanita Brooks. I recommend you familiarize with her life and the difficulties the church put in her way to publish this book, as well as the consequences she faced. In fact, Juanita recounts how she had to write her book in secret. Today, she is considered one of the most important historians of Utah history, a key figure in the history of this massacre, and there is now an award named after her. The other book is Vengeance is Mine, The Mountain Meadows Massacre and Its Aftermath by Barbara Jones Brown and Richard E. Turley. This book delves into the impact this massacre had on its victim for over 150 years. The thing here is that the church has always had documents and known the details, but it's never made them public or acknowledged its role in the massacre and allowed Native Americans to take blame for it. It wasn't until 2007, when the tragedy was already known and there was no point in hiding it, that the church released its first statement by Henry B. Eyring and allowed Richard E. Turley, historian and professor at BYU, access to documents which he used to create books about this massacre. This event is considered one of the darkest moments in American history because it does not only include the cold-blooded killing of innocent people, including women and children, but also because it includes dishonorable war tactics such as raising the white flag truce without any intention of honoring it. Members of the church place all blame on Native Americans for these events. The guilty parties made a secrecy oath to never speak of what happened. John DeLee, the only person sentenced and punished by death for this incident, who was also the adopted son of Brigham Young, allowed the following photo to be taken on the day of his death and made public his testimony of what happened. I will read directly, but I clarify that there are contradictions in what John DeLee said throughout his life, and although in the end he wanted to hold Brigham Young responsible, there's no solid evidence that Brigham Young really ordered the massacre. Here I quote words from John DeLee and also about John DeLee. Lee claimed that he was a scapegoat and that other Mormons were more directly involved in the planning and in the killing. And although he maintained at first that Young was unaware of the massacre until after it took place, Lee would later state, in his Life and Confessions of John D. Lee, that the massacre occurred by the direct command of Brigham Young. And on the morning of his execution, Lee would write that Young was leading the people astray, and that he was being sacrificed in a cowardly, dastardly manner. I did everything in my power to save that people, and I'm the one that must suffer, Lee wrote. He closed by asking the Lord to receive his spirit, and then he was taken to the massacre site. As many as 300 onlookers had gathered. On March 28, 1877, John Doyle Lee, wearing a coat and scarf, took a seat atop the coffin where his body would lie. A photographer was nearby. Lee asked that whatever photograph was made be copied for his last 3 wives. The photographer agreed. Lee posed, and then, an hour before noon, he shook hands with the men around him, removed his coat and hat, and faced the 5 men of the firing party. "Let them shoot the bolts through my heart," Lee shouted. "Don't let them mangle my body." John D. Lee was a bishop of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormon Church, and was also a polygamist with 19 wives, which was then required to obtain the highest degree of eternal salvation according to Mormon doctrine in the 19th and early 20th centuries.